right. And we're live.
We're live. Yay!
Hello, and welcome to an impromptu Fearless Flight Live Crew Edition. Our fearless leader is somewhere in transit between Albany, New York, and Phoenix. As far as I know, he met one of his longtime friends and buddies from the Air Force. So, and I understand there aren't too many of those around, so you gotta celebrate when you get the chance. So Capt Ron will be back in the saddle next Tuesday. And if you're new here, this is Fearless Flight Live, our weekly live show where we welcome you if you are afraid to fly or you just simply want to learn more about aviation and airplanes and aviation news. And we where are you guys coming in from tonight? That's a different background.
Yeah, slightly.
Well, we're a little off current events, but we're so excited about where we were. We wanted to show you guys a few photos and tell you about it. We're near McMinnville, Oregon, and in McMinnville is probably the best aviation museum outside of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, the Evergreen Air and Space Museum, and we spent 2 days there, one in the air part and one in the space part, and we just have some historical photos we want to show with you guys, share with you guys. And if any questions come up, great. And if you don't like it, let us know. But we're just so taken with this. We wanted to share some of it with you.
I know so many of you enjoy aviation, as Dieter said. And so it's the history. You can go from way back when with the Wright brothers all the way up to the space race and the newest aircraft. So it's really a wonderful opportunity to see aviation from the very beginning to where we are right now, which is, and some of us are old enough to know aviation from quite a few years ago.
Well, and I think the exciting part to me anyways is when you say go way back when, it's actually not that long.
Right.
In the grand scheme of history. So let me just start our share. Here's our poster. And of course, every week, first thing we do is encourage you to join our Birds of a Feather Facebook group. If you're not a member yet, you're definitely missing out on support, missing out on encouragement, and missing out on camaraderie and just great tips and also awesome videos from people when they fly, which can really help lower that threshold. When I know one of the longtime can we call them Fearless Flight evangelists, Jim Duke? he loves taking video of takeoffs and landings, and he posts them in the Birds of a Feather. And this is really there's lots of feedback about that too. It's really great when you actually watch them. It's a part of you is already, it's called exposure therapy, right? I mean, you could also go to the airport, watch planes taking off, but sitting in the airplane, the shaking of the camera as the plane kind of gets going, that pretty much is what you're going to see. And so this is a great way to kind of practice a little bit of exposure therapy right there. So go join if you haven't. And if you are a member and you have flown somewhere and you haven't shared that, go and share it. People really want to hear it and they appreciate.
It's a wonderful community. It's just
totally, it is. So what are we going to talk about? Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is something that literally just happened a couple days ago. Fingers crossed, we have another Cleared for Takeoff 201 Air Hollywood edition coming up this October. And so Friday, October 18th, we're going to do the live class at the Air Hollywood studios, which I understand actually have moved since last year. So it's going to be a new set, so to speak. And for all those of you that wish you could attend but can't because you're not local to California, we're also gonna live stream it, and we have hopefully learned our lessons from last year, where unfortunately the live stream didn't go live. So this year, we're definitely gonna make that a bigger focus, because we had a lot of folks being really disappointed not being able to watch the live stream of the class. And then, of course, on the Saturday, October 19th, we're gonna fly from Burbank to, we don't know yet, probably Sacramento, and back. So next week we'll have all the details, hopefully also the page already up to sign up. But I'm gonna just ask you guys, you were at the last Air Hollywood class, and it was quite an amazing experience, as it always is. But what were some of the things that you really enjoyed about being there in that live class at the movie set?
Well, we had the woman who was the world record holder. Hadn't flown for 63 years.
For like her entire life.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Sandra, that title goes to you if you're watching.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It's just, it's almost otherworldly how exciting it is to have the in-person class, and then I don't know how to describe it. It's
quite
just
emotional to connect with the people, and they're very emotional. And Sandra said her grandkids were in a school soccer field waving at her. And we got done, and Ron said, "So Sandra, what'd you think?" And she goes, "Yeah, maybe I should have done this earlier," which was brutally funny. And then people came up to us in the airport and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?"
Right. Oh yeah, right.
And we said, "Well, we have this
With the
class
group,
for
yeah.
nervous flyers." Said, "Oh, can I get your contact information? I have people who want to know." So it's the personal experience is really something for the people who fly, and really something for us.
And even as Eric said, for the other people, other passengers in the terminal were supporting everybody. "Oh my gosh, that's a wonderful thing that you do."
Yeah.
And they're talking to our fearful flyers, and all of a sudden everybody just felt this sense of, like I said, community. And everybody was there rooting for everybody. It's just kind of, it's special. It's just special.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It really is. And I will just say one thing. If you have any chance of making it to Los Angeles on that date, or those 2 dates, I'd say you owe it to yourself, especially if you have not participated yet in any of the ones that we've done prior. It is a completely unique experience, and we're hoping that if you're not local, that the live stream can convey that with some accuracy. We're gonna, have a couple cameras going and really give you that experience of being inside of the fuselage and having, everything look like you're at a terminal. You really get to feel a lot of the sensations that you would feel already in the airport. And the thing that the thing that always blows me away, every single class we do there's at least one person that at some point says, "Oh my God, I completely forgot that I'm sitting in a warehouse. I thought I was in the air, and I could feel it. I felt myself gripping the armrests, and meanwhile I'm sitting in a warehouse in Los
On the
Angeles."
ground.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
This fellow who sponsors us doing this was once a fearful flyer himself. His name is Talat. And he's really hit a business niche. He's acquired these airplane mock-ups and all this stuff, and he has a boarding area and security and camera to run your stuff through like you do on the belt. And his airplanes, he doesn't have a 7.6 anymore, but he has his fuselages that are real. One of them was featured in Bridesmaids, and several movies have been filmed inside these airplane fuselages. So the reality is complete.
And he's a real cheerleader for all of us.
Yeah, he is.
Really is.
And I'd be honest, without his generosity and without his personal stake in it, there's no way we could occupy, a whole movie studio and prepare it and get it ready and, bring you that class at a price point that's insane.
Chance of a lifetime. It really
Yeah,
is.
it is. It really is. It's just quite something. All right, let me continue with our topics. So
Why we came here.
why we came here, exactly. Well, we're gonna hear about your trip, and then also we have a free live Cleared for Takeoff 101 online class coming up Sunday, August 4th. As a reminder, we don't have the in-person class in August in Phoenix, but we do have the class on Sunday, August 4th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And then, of course, if you want to ask any questions, just put them in chat here and we'll get to them at the end. But Eric, let's talk about a spruce.
Okay, so that's actually a blue spruce outside the museum, but that's not why we came here. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the spruce goose, not the blue spruce.
Oh, now
that's a nice tree.
Yeah, very nice. And there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them around the museum. That's right outside the museum. So if you got a picture inside the museum of the spruce goose, then people will see what we were talking about.
How about this one?
That's a better one.
That's a better one.
All right, so take it away.
So this airplane was built in the early 40s, and I just wanted to tell you a little about it. It was conceived by an industrialist who was pretty well off, Henry Kaiser, thinking about building a monster transport airplane because at the time in World War II, German submarines were dropping a lot of Allied shipping, and they wanted to see what they could do to maybe avoid the shipping part and transport troops and material to the war theater. So they commissioned Kaiser to do this, and he turned to Howard Hughes, who we'll get to in a minute, who was a brilliant engineer, aviation pioneer, all manner of things to start the project forward. And started forward they did, and he completed it. The incredible part of this airplane is it's the only one like it anywhere in the world, and it is made completely out of wood. And the reason they made it out of wood wasn't because they were crazy, was because the government limited supplies of aluminum and steel because they were so desperate for all the wartime constructions. And Hughes said, well, it could be done. And they discovered ways of laminating birch and gluing it together and forming it such that they could build this entire airplane, which the picture makes it look incredible, but you just can't conceive of the size of it. It's 320 feet long, a wooden airplane with 4 of those Pratt Whitney engines on each side, producing 3,000 horsepower each. And it's an amphibian.
It's a boat, flying boat.
It is a flying boat, and they managed to laminate and glue everything they needed to inside. And some of the joints were nailed to start with. And then once everything was set, they pulled the nails out and injected glue into those slots. Pulling the nails out saved them 7 or 8 tons of weight. And engineers have analyzed the glue to this day, and they said it's holding every bit as good or as well as it ever did to start with, as long as it's in there with the temperature and humidity controlled. That glue is no longer available on the open market because any sort of hazardous material, fume, or chemical compound that is known to man is in the glue. So it's
formaldehyde.
Yeah,
Lots of formaldehyde.
absolutely.
It's all formaldehyde. OSHA would have an absolute
the entire list. So that glue is not available for sale, but the proof is in the pudding. It works.
I just want to interject. When you see the spruce goose, and then in the lower left-hand corner is the replica of the Orville and Wilbur, and that's where flight started. and that went from Orville and Wilbur to the Spruce Goose, which was X number of decades later. And that's only part of this particular Air and Space Museum. But it gives you kind of a real interesting counterpoint on sizes and construction.
That is a perfect replica of the Wright Flyer. At the time, the Goose was 6 times bigger than any other aircraft, and it flew one time on November 2nd, 1947. It flew half a mile for about 30 seconds. The airplane, Howard had done a whole bunch of high-speed taxi tests in the airplane, and they went out. It was just supposed to be a taxi test day, and
it was on the water.
It was on the water, and everybody was convinced that probably Howard meant to fly it anyway. And what happened is, I don't have a picture of the tail section, but the elevators operated in parallel, but had differential power to each side of them. And one side, due to human error, still had a controlled gust lock installed in the elevator. And so when Howard went to rotate the nose and pull it off the water, he did, and got it to a height of about 70 feet. He probably knew right away something was wrong because one elevator was still locked. So everybody kind of thought he probably meant to fly at about at 1,000 feet over a circle over LA, come back and land and say he's sorry later. But he realized he had control problems right away and went back and landed it on the water. In the Long Beach Harbor.
Long Beach Harbor, yeah.
So he joins the short list of people that have ever taken an airplane off with a gust lock in and survived, on top of his other feats. And I want to go back to him for just a second. Howard, it was, if you're not familiar with him, I call him, he's either Elon Musk 1.0 or Musk is Howard Hughes 2.0. I mean, he was that brilliant. His various iterations included starting as a film tycoon and became an aviation pioneer through defense contracting. He raced airplanes and designed them. He was a tremendous engineer. At age 11, he became a licensed ham radio operator in the city of Houston. And at age 12, he built his own e-bike out of parts from his dad's manufacturing plant, was riding it around Houston. So he's a brilliant freaking guy. He'd set cross-country records, over the water records, around the world records, but not all of them ended happily. And he had some airplane crashes at a high rate of speed. And one of them, he was burned very badly, not expected to survive the night, but he did. And while he was in his hospital bed, he designed one of the first hospital beds for burn victims with hydraulics that could move the bed and the patient without having to pick up the patient and move them.
He was a Renaissance man. I mean, the true.
Yeah.
He was also a scratch golfer. I mean, the man did everything. He really, really did everything. And this was his baby. And I had never seen it. And this was my bucket list items, was to see the Spruce Goose.
He had wanted to be a pro golfer, but realized after plane crash number 2 or 3 that he wasn't going to improve over being a scratch golfer, and gave that up for his myriad of other pursuits. And do we have any can you flip?
I understand that you actually took the best photo of the Spruce Goose, right?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Should we show that?
Yeah, show that one now.
Go forward, sure. We can do that. We have lots.
So the museum says, they put this thing here and says, this is the best photo of the Spruce Goose, which doesn't look very much like it, but I thought, well, they've thought this over. So if they think that's the best photo, then I'll take a picture of it and we'll put it up.
They literally had places in the museums of where they knew you would get a great photo. So that
but we had to have that.
Yeah, we did.
Awesome. So, well, there is a great photo.
And that's, we asked someone to take our picture with the Spruce Goose, and you can see a lot of the other aircraft on the floor of the museum. This is the aviation building.
That's amazing. That's
really
awesome.
It's something else.
All right, and now we actually got an inside shot.
Right. That's the captain's seat. That's where Howard Hughes sat. It's just we added a little bit extra. We bought a little extra tour so we could go up into the control, and we could see exactly what they were all dealing with. There was a pilot, Captain Howard Hughes, and then a first officer, and then 3 engineers, because there were so many bells and whistles.
Yeah.
So,
And Don just said he's known to have had severe OCD, which goes
Yes.
to show that you can be successful even with anxieties. And I'm actually going to go
Yeah.
out on a limb and say, if you can channel your anxiety into excitement, and this man had tremendous amounts of excitement. And why I'm saying that is because anxiety and excitement actually use the same neurological pathways in the brain.
wow.
And so in that particular instance, it's just a natural, somehow internally he channeled that in ways like,
In positive ways.
I mean, how many of us have been in the hospital? When were you last inspired? You probably complained about certain things, this isn't good enough, that's not good enough, but you may not have had
Decided to invent a bed.
to invent a bed for your ailment or whatever the case may be,
That's why we opined that the engineering, the flying, all that stuff was probably good, but being a pro golfer with severe OCD was probably a bad idea. That was probably good that he gave that up anyway, even if it was because of injuries.
That is very true. And they also have one of you there as well.
Yeah, she took one of me.
Yes, and he's got his hands on the controls.
So a quick question again. Everything you said is made out of wood?
Yes, except there's metal reinforcement reinforcing the front of the cockpit where the windshield's hung in there. But that's the only metal inside the airplane structurally. It's really kind of incredible. Well, it really is incredible.
That is absolutely incredible. And the next shot is even more incredible. It just blows my mind. And
I'm little, but you see how little anybody is in comparison to that aircraft.
So how much thrust would these have created?
3,000 horsepower per engine. Yeah, 3,000.
24,000 horsepower on this thing?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And we thought, well, when it flew, one of the more incredible things was that wing cord, it's 11 feet from the bottom to the top. So a man can easily walk inside the wing out to the wingtip, which they did to inspect stuff. And the empty weight of it was, I think, 300,000 pounds. And people told him it would never fly, when in fact, the lift generated by that wing and the engines, the day he flew it, he was in the air at only 95 miles per hour, an appallingly low speed. And he was very lightweight, but nevertheless, it flew, and it flew just fine. If he had in the rudder gust lock in, it would have done even better.
Yes.
So he had intended to fly it some more, but the tail structure was damaged some from the stresses induced by having the elevator gust lock in, and they repaired it. And Howard had intended to fly it again, but because of the crashes and the burns, he was an unintentional opioid addict.
For pain. He was a really, early on, and the opiates.
Took those for years. And at some point, the government had abandoned it, but Howard picked this up with his own money. So it was effectively his airplane, and he didn't want anybody else to fly it. So it was locked away for decades, but ready to go at any one point until he died and the Disney Corporation bought it. And if it hadn't been damaged, everybody's quite sure that he would have flown it a lot at a much greater altitude and really proved a point with it.
Anyway.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
so that's just another
view of incredible.
How incredibly huge this thing is. Yeah.
All right. So I'm blown away. I don't know how our audience feels about it, but I'm just fascinated by the story behind it. I mean, I've seen pictures and stuff, but nothing like that. So thank you guys for
up in the flight deck. There were chairs, and those chairs were for the media because Howard Hughes brought along a lot of news people to bear witness to the fact that he was flying the aircraft and everything else. As a matter of fact, we just learned from another one of the docents, the tour guides, that he had a co-pilot, except for that day in that flight, he didn't have a co-pilot because he did not want there to be any question of whether or not he was flying the plane. I mean, he was the only one.
Exactly right.
So he kind of dismissed the co-pilot. So he could prove to the media that he actually flew the plane.
And can you just, we have two questions actually come in about where exactly this museum is. I know you mentioned it off the top, but if you can just mention it again.
It's in McMinnville, Oregon. We flew into Portland and then drove south from Portland. You can fly to Eugene, Oregon as well. And it's about an hour and a half to 2 hours north of Eugene, about an hour and a half south of Portland. But it's kind of in the middle of nowhere.
It's in the middle of Pinot wine country.
Wine country, yes.
That's vineyards as far as the eye can see.
That's where we're doing our next trip. But this trip was all airplanes all the time. But it's a beautiful part of the country. It's just that it's kind of not near much of anything, really, which is kind of nice, actually.
All right, and I understand. Then you have another
I do
little story, and I just want to say that plane that you're standing right next to is exactly the plane that flew me around while I was on an expedition in Antarctica. It's one of the most yeah, it's a DC-3. Yeah, they're still flying.
Oh, that's very interesting, Dieter.
Yeah.
Well, this aircraft and the information plaques in front of it was very meaningful. I mean, you flew in, and Eric, of course, is just this incredible wealth of information. But the important part about this aircraft is right to my right as I'm standing there. There's a picture of a woman. Her name is Ellen Church. And Ellen Church was the first stewardess. And you can probably go to the next slide, the next photo, and that's Ellen Church. And she was born in 1904. She was a registered nurse. She had gone to university in the Midwest, and she was also a pilot. And she went to the airlines looking for a job as a pilot, but she was a woman, and so they would not hire her. And so she, still loving the air and wanting to fly, convinced the head of Boeing Air Transport, BAT, which eventually became United Airlines, as you can see that in this photograph, that the airlines needed to have a nurse on board, which would help with their passengers if there was a problem or keep them at ease. Keep in mind that the flying public hadn't been flying very long. And air travel was such a new experience that lots of people, maybe people are afraid to fly now or they're very anxious about it, but you have to look way back into the 1930s on how new it was. And it wasn't quite as safe as it is right now. And so she did. She convinced the CEO that they needed to hire her specifically, of course, to be a stewardess, as they were called at one point, sky ladies. And she wound up eventually recruiting 7 more women. Back then, of course, my story is I want to be a stewardess, but I wasn't tall enough. I would have fit right in, because here the requirements were you had to be a registered nurse, you had to be single, you had to weigh less than 115 pounds, and you had to be shorter than 5'4". And the interior of the airplanes, and we'll get to that in a second, was little, so being short was an advantage. And back then, that the stewardesses had to not only attend to the passengers, but when required or when needed, they had to help haul the luggage They may have to help fuel the planes, assist the pilots. And back then their salary was $125 a month, which in our money now is a little over $2,000 a month. So they still weren't paid very much. The first flight for Ellen was from Oakland to Chicago. She had 14 passengers and they made 13 stops. So it was a lot more interesting back in the day when Ellen started. And so she is really the mother of us all. And then the next picture, which is even more amazing for me, I must admit, I got a little emotional.
Yeah, you did.
I did. I almost started crying. That's the inside of that airplane that Ellen Church worked in. And in this particular aircraft, there were 21 seats. And in the front is the little tiny flight deck. And there was an area right in back of it where they carried mail. That's where they carried the mail.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a tiny little lavatory all the way in the back of the aircraft. And what you can't see in this picture, which you saw in the very first one, is that plane is at an angle because it has
A tail wheel.
a tail wheel, and so it's kind of at a steep angle. So it was kind of interesting. But this was, I think, the third remaining.
Yeah, and this was serial number, I think, 36, and it was owned by United. So Diane highly likely is standing in the exact position where Ellen probably stood and worked
in this particular aircraft.
Yeah.
So it was very emotional. It was very emotional
Wow.
to see how far we've all come. The flight attendants and the pilots and the aircraft and everything. So
Yeah.
it was pretty.
Yeah.
It was a pretty emotional experience.
That's pretty epic. Speaking of emotional, and epic and close to your heart is the next picture
Yeah.
that we have.
And this one was very made a lot. Meant a lot to me. It's listed as painted as a Navy plane, but that's an A4. And many of you know that my brother passed away in June, and he was in the Marine Corps. And this is the plane, the aircraft, not the very plane, but that's the type of aircraft. The plane that he flew was an A4 in the United States Marine Corps. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, please, can we get a picture of that? Because that's my brother's plane.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah. So.
Wow. And I understand that, Eric, you spotted what exactly did you spot? Because I'm looking at it and it looks a bit like a soapbox car.
That's exactly what it looks like. So we're walking around there, and we've talked about advances in training and advances in training. And here was the thing that allowed pilots to learn how to fly by reference to instruments only. And I wish I'd backed up a little bit so you could see the pretty yellow tail. It's a blue wooden box with a little airplane tail on it. And it's about the size of a coffin, but maybe not as comfortable. And pilots would fly into clouds and come spinning out the bottom right and left. It was very hard back in the day to train people how to fly by reference to instruments only without killing themselves or the pilot. Well, this fellow in New York, Ed Link, had wanted to be a pilot, but he didn't have the money to go to flight school at the time. But he was another one of these guys that was a pretty clever guy. And his dad and his uncle owned a piano and an organ company. And Ed used his knowledge of pumps and valves and bellows from his dad's piano and organ company to make this simulator on a single post so that it would move and mimic airplane movements. And it had a basic set of instruments in front. It could pitch and roll and do everything a normal airplane could. And the instructor would sit outside at a desk, could communicate with a pilot, and there would be a little piece of graph paper and an instrument on it called the crab that would trace the pilot's flight and show where he went as opposed to where he was supposed to go. This is literally the first flight simulator that Ed invented in 1929. And a few of the stats on that were eventually 500,000 US pilots were trained on Link simulators. And if you subtract Ron from that, that's 499,999. But he trained in the Link some too. So the Link, Ed was scrapping like any business guy to make sales. And at one point, the Army Air Corps took over delivery of airmail. They got the airmail contract, but during a bad stretch of 78 days, they had 12 fatal crashes due to the pilots going into instrument clouds, instrument meteorological conditions, losing control of the airplanes and crashing and smearing the mail all over. So they cast around all over to see, okay, we got to do something about this. And Link pitched his simulator to the Army and flew to a meeting with the Army guys, and it happened on that day to be exceptionally foggy. At this point, Link had a reasonable amount of money, and it just said, well, nobody will hire me. I'll buy my own airplane. So he bought his airplane and flew it into the meeting in a real foggy day where the military guys would have thought it was just not flyable at all. And that pretty much sold it before Link got on the ground. And so his sales of that to the military, to train military pilots, really took off. And in 1937, American Airlines was the first airline to buy Link simulators. They bought the first Link simulators, and pretty soon all the airlines had Links as their first simulator for flight training. But I thought we should have a picture of this and say, well, that was the beginning of training transitioning from in the airplane to in a simulator device. And for the day, Link simulator could do a lot of things.
Well,
make you a sharp person.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And I just want to contrast that with an L3 Harris flight simulator. Which is the state-of-the-art simulator these days. And yeah, it looks more like a UFO or spaceship or something.
It really does. Yeah.
Where did you get that picture, Dieter?
I just I know that Ron had talked about the L3 in one of the, I don't know, we had a webinar once, and so I just pulled that off the internet, and I guess that's one of the configurations. You would know what airplane is that, you know?
Well, it's definitely it appears to be an Airbus 320, and it may not be a 320, but it's one of the Airbus lines. It could be one of the bigger ones, because I noticed they have a spare set of screens down here. And Airbus airplanes are controlled by electrical signals, as we call it, fly-by-wire, no cables, working pulleys or anything, and each pilot has a side stick. So that's one of the heavy-duty Airbus models. And these sims now are so accurate in depicting flight. You can get all of your flight training in the simulator, and you're fully qualified to get in the airplane and fly it. And that's what happened to me when I went through not my first 737 training, but Airbus training. I got out of the Airbus simulator and with a Czech airman, crawled into the airplane and flew it up to Dieter's neck of the woods, up to Toronto. And the weather was so nasty up there, it was just like we trained in the simulator. You couldn't actually see anything, but we were in fact in Toronto. And if I'm perfectly comfortable doing it, because that's all I've been doing for weeks and weeks and weeks, and go, well, I guess you don't have to see anything because there's nothing to see.
Yeah.
But you're perfectly comfortable doing it when you crawl out of the sim. There's no difference between flying the simulator and the airplane now.
Amazing.
Yeah, that is pretty fascinating, like how and you know, I'm gonna come back to the plug that we made right in the beginning. If you have any opportunity, and we have even had people who flew to be at the Air Hollywood Cleared for Takeoff 201 class, but this is really the closest, and to my knowledge, really the only fear of flying class that is being housed in a, other than, you guys in Phoenix every month, every first Saturday of the month, with the Cleared for Takeoff 101. There really is nothing like it anywhere, as not in North America. I know that in the UK, EasyJet is offering fear flying classes, and they do use their airplanes. However, I think especially with having, Captain Ron, Captain Eric, Flight Attendant Diane, having the whole experience there, yeah, it's just really, that's an amazing experience. And I know that a couple of you have already put some comments in the chat how amazing the class is. So wow, thank you guys so much. That sounds like a pretty epic trip, actually.
It really
It was
was.
very fun.
It really was. You really can't do this particular museum in one day. You really can't. You really need to. And we were very fortunate enough to have that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really neat. Quite the timeline. And when you see the stuff these guys got their hands on, the collections are unbelievable. And the other museum across the walkway from it is the Space Museum, and tells the story from the origins of spaceflight when the Russians were out in front, and the race to
everything.
Sputnik and the race to the moon, and the first dogs in space, and the first man in space, and the rockets, and how they were all developed, and their capabilities and shortcomings. And that's equally fascinating.
And they have examples and actual lunar modules. I mean, they have everything, as Eric said. So just as in the aviation section with the planes and the actual aircraft that have been restored, saved and restored, same thing with the Space Museum part. They have tell them about the SR-70.
It didn't tie in at all, so I didn't submit
but just tell them
pictures to Dieter, but I don't know where he got it. There weren't that many built, but the museum got their mitts on a Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird spy plane, of which there are very few left, and they have a real no kidding one backed into the corner of the Space Museum. And maybe next show, people ask, I'll have Dieter get a stock photo. It's very photogenic, but one was never lost in combat. They crashed a few of them landing, but it was an incredible airplane, able to go far above Mach 3, and flew so high. Some of the stuff still restricted, and I knew a couple guys who flew to go, yeah, all that stuff's wrong. It can do a lot better than that. But the guys would fly it over Russia and China, and take pictures, and the Russians would shoot at them with their best surface-to-air missiles, and they would just look out the airplane and watch the missiles fall away behind them. They could outrun them. They didn't see them coming. They didn't lead them, shoot in front, and the missiles would just fall away. And we even thought, for the time when they were really using that, the 60s and the 70s, the technology then to have something like that was amazing. And one of the coolest things they had was a picture from about 70-something thousand feet of a power plant in Palo Alto, and the clarity and the picture of the power plant taken from 70,000 feet. You're going, well, no wonder they were shooting missiles at them. That's a really good camera.
You could almost see the detail on the stop signs and stuff. It was
oh my goodness,
really phenomenal. So it's that part of the museum. It's just, it takes off from the Wright brothers all the way to this SR-71, which is matte black and very evil looking. But it's just, I mean, some of those aircraft, and there's a whole nother section with helicopters and rotary wing aircraft, and they've got a drone. And they have a little. I mean, they just have everything. They have aircraft outside on the grounds, and then in a back parking lot, they have quite a few aircraft. They get donations, and they just don't have any room for them just yet, and they're waiting to be restored. And they have many volunteers. and some of original mechanics who have worked on the original aircraft, and they're assisting with the restoration. So it's a really quite an amazing, and they have an educational branch. There are school children. So it's really quite an amazing opportunity.
As Diane said, I took a couple pictures of the 71 and I wanted to have Dieter bring them up, but they don't really tie into anything other than the fact that I really like the plane, but they're so full. Now it kind of looks like Pawn Stars or barn finds. They had to shove it off in the corner with other stuff. So there's just so much garbage in there that I thought, oh, it's not garbage, but they're just, it's like climbing through your grandparents' attic. And I go, none of these pictures are any good because they had to jam it in the corner to get the other stuff in there.
So you see, they have a Titan missile that is partly under the floor level that you can walk down and see the thrusters, and it goes all the way to the ceiling of this gigantic space museum. And that is, well, we just happen to have a Titan missile without the entire silo right here inside the museum part.
It's like an episode of Aviation Hoarders.
Yeah,
exactly right.
That's exactly what it is. It's just mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing.
Wow. Well, thank you again. That is really, really cool. And I know a lot of people commented that they really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. And once again, we'll be back next week, Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. and Pacific, and we will have much more information about the both the class itself as well as the live stream. Hopefully I'll get all the registration stuff done in this week, and then we'll present it to you next week on the show. All right. And I just want to point out, we went through an entire show without really having to talk about any snafus about commercial aviation. Meanwhile, more planes than ever have taken off and landed on North American airports than ever before. So I just want you to kind of let that sink in as well. All right. Well, thank you, Diane. Thank you, Eric. Enjoy the rest of your trip. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of inspiration and ideas for the next trip.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, and see you guys next week.
See you guys.
Bye.
I hope you guys liked it.